And that ball is stroked. Gone! Oh my goodness, on a frozen rope.
Throw in there on one hop. Out! Oh, he hosed him.
Hop steps, great dump off, and a two-hand jam. Welcome back for episode 20 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. I spoiled you a little bit with a guest the last 2 weeks in Hunter Myers. If you missed those episodes, we gave all of our postseason awards predictions and the full 30-team MLB power rankings at the All-Star break. You shouldn't have to wait long for another collab. I'm planning to bring in another fellow commentator for episode 21 next week, and I might need to stretch that into 2 episodes based on the length of the session. This week, to tide us over, I'm going to go over all things MLB Trade Deadline, if for no other reason than to try and figure out why it was so lackluster. Let's crack it open. First up, we have to talk about the biggest moves that were actually made at the deadline. Hint, there weren't that many. Here are my top 3 best players moved at the MLB trade deadline this year. The number 1 best performing guy to be traded, believe it or not, is from the Marlins bullpen. Tanner Scott is a left-handed closer with a bonkers 1.18 ERA and an ERA plus of 3.70. That means he is literally 270% better than the average pitcher. And I would say he's the best lefty closer in the game by far. Scott is heading to the Padres. The one thing is, it did cost San Diego 3 of their organization's top 5 prospects. The Marlins also sent righty Brian Hoeing in the package, having a good year in his own right with a 2.70 ERA as a spot starter and a middle reliever. The Padres bullpen is probably the best in baseball right now, and they're hot. They're about 5 games behind the Dodgers. They have a chance of making that ground up. Now, number 2, the second best guy that got moved at the deadline. This is the guy everybody knew kind of had to be on the move. The talks went all the way down to the last couple of minutes, but eventually Jack Flaherty was dealt from the Tigers to the Dodgers. He got his start moved from before the trade deadline to after, so this was really no shock. It pains me to see him go, but Detroit had every opportunity to make streaks, put some runs together, and get back in the division race, and they never did. They lost too many division games right out of the All-Star break, and they're 52 and 57 at the time of recording. This is what happens to teams in that spot. Good news is for Detroit, I guess, they don't have to hand him a big pricey extension along with Tarek Skubal. It's going to be the king eats first and everybody else gets the leftovers. The Dodgers could have an all-time great rotation with a healthy Clayton Kershaw, Jack Flaherty, Tyler Glasnow, Walker Buehler, and Yoshinobu Yamamoto. That is a World Series rotation if I've ever heard one, but LA has been known to greatly underachieve in the postseason. Time will tell. One deal that I do think will really fly the most under the radar, although it could be one of the best value deals in recent memory, comes in at number 3. There was a complicated 3-team deal, the crown jewel of which was Eric Fedde from the White Sox to the Cardinals. You know, this White Sox team, they're making a really good run at being the worst team in the history of the league. They currently sit at 27 and 83 on a 16-game losing streak, and yet they have 2 fantastic starting pitchers in Garrett Crochet and Eric Fedde. Here's the story about Fedde. He was out of the majors after a couple of poor years with the Nationals as sort of a number 4 to number 5 starter. He did a stint in Korea, and he comes back this year at 31 years old to Major League Baseball. For some reason, he is far better than ever before. His contract is super reasonable at about $7.5 million a year. He has a 3.11 ERA, 7-4 record, and is on pace for almost 200 innings. That all with by far the worst team in baseball and maybe the worst team in history behind him. Now, what's this trade mean for the Cardinals? The Cardinals are 2 games over 500 and in second place in the NL Central. There are things that they do well, but starting pitching isn't one of them. Sonny Gray is their number 1 starter, and they rely heavily on 37-year-old Lance Lynn and 36-year-old Kyle Gibson. They at least won't lose out on the playoffs now just because of poor starting pitching when you factor in adding Fedde. If they do run out of gas, I think it'll just be because Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt's careers as hitters are kind of out of gas too. I think Fedde could still be a Cy Young candidate. You might think that it's usually more difficult to win when you switch leagues, but you don't have to compete with Tarek Skubal. Crazier things have happened. Next is another installment of winners and losers. If you'll recall, I did this with Zach Metz in the NFL Draft Recap episode, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Winners made the right calls at the trade deadline. Either it was for their World Series hopes for this year or for their future. Losers, well, they might have sold too low, bought too high, folded when they should have played their hand, that kind of thing. No further ado, to kick off the winners, I have to go with the Seattle Mariners. They took Randy Arozarena, an outfielder from the Rays, and I think he's going to fit in really nicely with them. The Mariners as a team are not pretty to watch on offense. They're hardly hitting any worse, though, than Arozarena is right now in what is by far the worst year of his career. Arozarena should be an everyday left fielder for them after largely playing in center field for Tampa. Of course, that's Julio Rodriguez's spot, and although Rodriguez's bat is also a little cold, they need all hands on deck. Their outfield is probably the worst offensively in the entire league, but this should be an upgrade. The Mariners just lost the division lead to the Astros the last couple of weeks, and they really might have to scramble to get the wild card. Seattle's other big add, or at least it certainly would have been if they could just de-age him by a couple of years, is the Blue Jays' Justin Turner. Turner is very accomplished, as he should be, having played for 16 years. He turns 40 in November, making him the oldest non-pitcher in the league if you don't count Joey Votto, who hasn't appeared in a major league game this year. 193 home runs, 790 RBI on his career, 124 career OPS plus. That is, he's 24% better than an average hitter. Not a Hall of Fame career, but a very good ball player. He should mostly DH now, I'm guessing, but that's not really a problem. Seattle doesn't have anybody else that's worth that DH spot. Mariners' starting pitching staff, outstanding. Bullpen, very good. Defense, not great, but they definitely aren't going to get any worse there with these two guys. Add it up, and the Mariners should have a good chance at coming back over Houston and winning the division. If not, I think that they at least for sure have sticking power in the wild card race. My number one loser is actually so obvious that I feel pretty bad for them. I can't even claim that they got fleeced or they made really bad decisions, but they still had to gut their entire baseball team. The Tampa Bay Rays had one single All-Star this year in Isaac Paredes, and like you might imagine, he's now gone. Of all the teams in the world calling for him, though, the Cubs may have been dead last among the ones I would have guessed. Let's see if I can parse this out in my head. So the Rays were 55-52 at the deadline, I believe 9 games back in the best division in baseball. But they were only 3 games back in the wild card race. The Cubs are 51-57, 6 games back of the second wild card. They have no hope of making any noise if they do somehow scrape their way into the playoffs, and they are the buyers in this situation. That is just so backwards to me. The Rays got rid of Isaac Paredes. He's a good but not great bat with 16 home runs, 55 RBIs on the year. They got rid of Zach Eflin, their number one starting pitcher, who went to Baltimore and now should have a really good chance of getting a World Series ring. Randy Arozarena is another good bat, albeit one that was underperforming. He had 15 home runs and 37 RBI. He was only hitting .215 on the year when they shipped him out. And that's a far cry from last year's All-Star season or when he won Rookie of the Year back in 2021. Now, not a single fan wants to hear the sort of moral victory side, but they did get back some good prospects for just about all of those deals that they made. This is baseball, and baseball is a business like any other, right? The only good news for Tampa Bay was Yandy Diaz sticking around. He is a highly serviceable first baseman in a lot of ways. I didn't even realize this until I was sort of looking through their roster from this year and historically. Last year, Yandy Diaz hit .330 and racked up 5.2 WAR. That's phenomenal. The Rays are essentially at 500, and yet they're in tank mode. See if you can figure that one out, because I have no idea. Next winner is actually my beloved Detroit Tigers. Sue me. I really can't complain about the trades that Detroit made at all. Maybe some of the ones that they didn't, but I'm not going to get into that too much because we can't control it. Finally, though, I can stop holding my breath. The AL Cy Young will stay in Detroit. Tarik Skubal will probably get MVP votes at this current pace. He's an absolute unit at 6'3", 240 pounds. He's going to have a chance at winning the AL Triple Crown. He's just 27 years old. He's hitting his prime at the perfect time. He is in desperate need of one of the biggest contracts all time for a starting pitcher. If it doesn't come this offseason, the entire franchise is cooked from top to bottom. The moves the Tigers did make. They traded Carson Kelly, their sort of starting platoon-ish catcher. And then there's Andrew Chafin, a very solid lefty reliever to the Rangers. Those were in 2 separate deals. Mark Canha, first baseman / outfielder and sort of an average offensive producer. He's now with the Giants. And, of course, the aforementioned Jack Flaherty, the number 2 starter, to the Dodgers. They got back a couple of catching prospects, which I actually think is a fine idea if those guys work out, as well as a handful of pitchers I'm not super excited about, and I believe nobody above AA so far. Kind of a shame that they couldn't steal a couple of the top prospects, but it is what it is in their position. They had to play for the future, and I think they made the right call pretty much every time if you ask me, but the rebuild is not quite over yet. I hate to say it. Next loser is the best team in baseball. We don't say that very often, do we? The Phillies. Philadelphia had been linked to tons of top options, even from other really good teams. If they added Skubal, Jack Flaherty, if they could have brought in a power-hitting center fielder like Luis Robert of the White Sox, they would make their road to the World Series so much easier. Instead, they got one average lefty reliever from Chicago, that's Tanner Banks, and a bit above average closer in the Angels' Carlos Estevez. They gave up Gregory Soto, one of their best bullpen arms, and the only bat that they brought in is Austin Hayes, an outfielder from the Orioles. Average hitter for his career, a bit below average this year, and only 3 home runs and 14 RBIs in 66 games. If you're really all in to win the World Series this year, like Philly should be, why would you not get a difference maker? I know it could have been done. Rob Thompson, their GM, what are we doing? The options were all out there. Maybe they didn't get in on the top guys early enough, or they couldn't justify giving up good prospects for just sort of a short-term deal or a rental. You know when you have time to think about the distant future? Not in September, and definitely not in October. More like February. I don't get it from Philly at all. The final winner for this year's trade deadline is the New York Yankees. Yuck, I hate to say it. It started with Jazz Chisholm Jr. of the Marlins. He was an all-star back in 2022, probably could have made the team this year as well, and he's one of a precious few guys that really can change a game with speed that moved at the deadline. That just wasn't real popular this year. Jazz is 23 of 31 in steals for the year. Now, the percentage is not so good, but the aggressiveness is. The Yankees are one Anthony Volpe away from having no one with more than 5 stolen bases or 7 total attempts. They're second to last in steals in the whole league. They have one of the game's slowest players in Giancarlo Stanton, who absolutely demands the DH spot. And they've got offensive problems from pretty much everyone not named Aaron Judge or Juan Soto. Jazz has 2 home run games in his first 2 out with the Yankees. That's just unbelievable. Obviously, you're going to say, oh, this is the best fit ever. They made the perfect move, but of course, that's not sustainable. Chisholm's actually been playing third base so far over Oswaldo Cabrera, but he would have been an upgrade at pretty much any position besides their 2 superstars. You have Soto in right and Judge in center. Apparently, the Yankees' everyday second baseman Gleyber Torres has refused to move to third, even with the most errors at his position in the league in a .681 OPS. He is not nearly a good enough player right now to throw a fit on a team that should be able to win the World Series. Period. Grow up. Now, the Yankees' other adds were minor. They got some promising 20-something pitching prospects and an average-ish reliever, Enyel de los Santos from the Padres. They didn't actually do as much as a lot of other teams, but I'm totally here for quality over quantity. Jazz Chisholm should be one of the best moves, and as we mentioned, he already has shown off the fireworks. They're in a huge series with Philly right now that's kind of looking like it could be for who is the best team in baseball right now. Of course, there's still the Orioles to think about, but who knows? If you have one major need and you totally fill it, you nail it at the deadline, you're a winner. Now my final loser for the 2024 trade deadline, the Minnesota Twins. The AL Central race has actually been super tight between them, the Guardians, and the Royals all year long, and Minnesota got to the deadline and choked. They don't have star power like the other two in the AL Central. They're middle of the pack in a lot of stats, and I'd say they're very fortunate to be 59-47. They're holding that top wild card by half a game. Thing is, you have to be very clutch in order to win that many games without the huge talent, and we all know that that can be unsustainable, especially in the playoffs. The only move that they made was for a middle reliever from Toronto named Trevor Richards with a career .475 ERA. You can't kid yourself if you're Minnesota and say that your ball club is as good as the Yankees, the Phillies, the Orioles, the Dodgers, any of the top teams in the league overall. Every one of them has gotten better, and you stayed the same. At this rate, it would be kind of surprising for them to even hold on to that wild card. You've got the Royals, Red Sox, Mariners, and the Rays within 4.5 games of them for that second wild card spot. Twins, what are you doing? Other winners and losers that I've seen people mention, of course the Dodgers landing Jack Flaherty, being probably the biggest name. In addition, they brought in Kevin Kiermaier to play center field for them. He's a multiple Gold Glover and runs extremely well. That would have just been too boring, right? The Dodgers' billion-dollar payroll already puts me to sleep. The losers, a lot of people say the White Sox should have continued selling. They didn't move Garrett Crochet, their phenomenal left-handed starter. They didn't move Luis Robert, their slugging center fielder who hasn't hit very well this year. Overall, they did still have a lot of roster turnover, got solid prospects back. I don't think that the White Sox did all that bad. So that's all I have on the MLB trade deadline, at least for now. June 30th at 6 p.m. came and went with no cataclysmic natural disasters or laws of physics broken, as far as I can tell. Let me know if I'm wrong on that. It appears to be just another day in July. It's just one where some more players move teams. It was a quite tame trade deadline, I would say, if you zoom out on it. Thanks in large part, of course, to Tarek Skubal staying put in Detroit. There were tons of former and could-be future All-Stars that got moved, but very few current and especially not perennial ones. Now, this offseason's free agent class should be a very different story, but you're going to have to catch me in the winter for that. I'm not done with baseball for the year, definitely not, but I will probably watch a little bit less down the stretch if the Tigers end up being out of contention a little earlier on. It truly is almost time for football to come back, and I'm about to be so dialed in. We will never hurt for content around here. Next week, I'm going to do my best to bring you the MLB Hall of Fame tier list. Planning to have a guest on who is a fellow commentator. Just like I did with Isaiah Fleming regarding the NFL, I'll tell you every active guy that'll be on the outside looking in. I'll tell you who's a lock right now and who's just one big year away from wrapping up their case. Hopefully, I get to trigger you by ragging on your favorite player. Fun fact, that's actually my favorite thing to do. Upload streak now in the 20-week range, over a month down in my master's program. All good over here. Oh, and one personal update. I'm entering my first powerlifting meet at the end of October. I've started my prep, and I'll likely work in a little bit of chronicling that into some episodes when it's appropriate. Maybe even dip into covering some strength sports a little bit. I already enjoy them a lot. I follow a lot of the top guys on social media, things like that. Even more content, that's all that means. Glory, glory, hallelujah. This has been episode 20 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Thanks for joining me.
And that ball is stroked. Gone! Oh my goodness, on a frozen rope. Throw in there on one hop. Out! Oh, he hosed him.
Hop steps, great dump off and a two-hand jam.